What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 30 deadline. So I'm going to go through the latest press conference information and then answer some of your questions as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Now, what better place to start than talking about Erling Haaland? A lot of us have sold him recently. We're wondering whether to get him back in ahead of the Game Week 30 deadline. And over the last couple of days, we've seen the Man City social media team posting videos of Haaland that he's back in training. And Pep was asked about him today in the press conference. And he said he's trained the last 2 days. Really good. He will be ready. Now, obviously, he will be ready does not mean he's definitely going to be in the starting 11. It could be ready to be back in the squad and on the bench. We're not going to know either way before the deadline because the game for Man City isn't until 5:30 Saturday evening UK time. But I do think that is more positive than I was expecting. We haven't had another, there's a session later, we'll have to wait and see, we're going to assess him tomorrow or anything like that. Really good after saying that he trained the last 2 days. I think that's quite positive. Now, if you're going to ask me, which a lot of people will, do I think Haaland is going to start or not? It's tricky, but if I had to bet some money right now on whether he'd start or be on the bench, I think I would put the money on him starting. And the reason for that is they've got an important game against Bayern Munich midweek in the Champions League. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking, well, if they've got that big game, you rest him against Southampton and then play him against Bayern Munich, right? And that would make sense. But if they do that, he hasn't played a match for 4 weeks. So to then get thrown straight in to a Champions League game, I'm not sure they would do that. And I feel like they'd want to get minutes in his legs against Southampton instead to start building up that match fitness ahead of the Bayern Munich game. Now, they could, of course, do that from the bench. They could bench him and then just play him for 30 minutes. But I feel like they're going to want to start him if they can and get maybe 50 to 60 minutes under his belt instead. It's worth saying that apart from through injury, Haaland hasn't been rested for any game in the Premier League to then play midweek. So he's been rested in kind of League Cup and FA Cup, but Premier League he's played every single game he's been fit for, and then also played in the Champions League as well, especially when it's been kind of an important match. So I think there's more likelihood of him starting and then also playing against Bayern Munich than being benched. But he could just be benched and come on for 20 to 30 minutes instead. Right? I don't know with 100% certainty. I am just guessing. In terms of what you should do with him, obviously if you're an owner, you just keep him. But in terms of buying, if you are sceptical about whether or not he's going to start against Southampton, you're really not sure, there's no player you really want to take out, or it would take a -4, you could just wait until Game Week 31 instead, because Leicester at home is also a great fixture. A lot of it might also depend on whether you're free hitting in Game Week 32. If you aren't free hitting that week, where Haaland and all the other Man City players are going to blank, and you're not sure about whether he starts this week, you could just put off getting him until Game Week 33. That would be quite a scary prospect because we know what Haaland can do, but that is an option. If you are someone that is committed to using the free hit in Game Week 32, I feel like there's even more reason to just bring him in now because you don't have to go against the crowd, which will definitely own him. Most people are either going to have kept him or they're going to bring him back in. We know what his ownership is already like. We know the damage he can do. If you've got a free hit in 32, I just don't know why you would fight against that unless you don't have a great way to bring him in. So I know for a lot of people, they've priced themselves out of doing moves like Tony to Haaland, so perhaps they have to take a hit. I think that could be viable depending on who else you're removing and also what your feelings are with captaincy, because that's another conversation, right? If you really want to captain him, I would take the -4. If you're going to bring him in and still want to captain someone else who's maybe has more secure minutes like Rashford, for example, or Kane or Watkins, then maybe taking that -4 this week probably isn't quite as good. So there's loads of things to think about, right? Are you free hitting in 32 or not? Who do you have to remove if you're going to take a hit? And if you do bring him in, are you going to captain him? Because if you are, that justifies the move a little bit better. Just to answer one more question I think that will come up, what do I think of Harry Kane to Haaland? Now, I've kind of been against that move for most of the week. It's not something that I really thought was worthwhile because Kane's got guaranteed start, guaranteed minutes this week and plays Bournemouth at home in Game Week 31. But now I'm thinking, do I really think that Kane against Bournemouth is better than Haaland against Leicester, given how Leicester have defended so far this season and how ridiculously good Haaland has been? I'm not so sure. So if I also think Haaland's going to start this week against Southampton away, and look, it is an away game, but I don't think Southampton is that difficult of a fixture. Well, Kane is at home, but he's got to play against Brighton, and I'm not so sure how well Spurs are going to do in that game. So I think if you are looking at Haaland thinking, I just don't want to go without him, it's too scary, I don't want to go against everyone else, the ownership is too high, and Kane is your only route to Haaland, I think it's okay. But if you're not sure about it, I also think it's okay just to keep Kane as well. And I know that's like sitting on the fence, but I do feel like it's that kind of decision with Kane to Haaland. So I feel like if it was me, I probably would just get pushed into getting Haaland because I'd hate having to go without him. But if you're an FPL manager that feels like you can cope with, I don't even know what to call it, the pressure, I guess, or something like that, then just keep hold of Harry Kane. But if you've got an obvious move like Havertz or Tony or someone like that to Haaland, you can do it in one move. Just get it done. It's going to be worth it. If he plays against Southampton and Leicester, they are big points. So we know Luke Shaw went off with an injury against Brentford, and we have heard from Erik ten Hag today. He said Luke Shaw is not available for tomorrow, so he has been ruled out for Everton at home in game week 30. It is a bit frustrating because part of the reason we got him in game week 29 was for the double game week, but also for the couple of nice fixtures they had afterwards. So to miss one of them already is a bit annoying, but all hope is not lost. He went on to say, we have to see about the progress for the coming week. So he hasn't been ruled out for like 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks or anything like that. They're going to see how he gets on over the next 6 to 7 days and then make another assessment ahead of Nottingham Forest away. So there is a chance he'll play in game week 31. I would say it's quite a slim chance, but we obviously don't have any more information than what Ten Hag has said. For my own team, I'm basically viewing it as, if he's out for game weeks 30 and 31, can my team cope with that? So that's what I would do with your own squads. Whether or not to get rid of him is going to depend on a couple of things, right? One is going to be free hit. That is always part of the conversation. If you're free hitting in game week 32, then that week doesn't matter to you anyway. I feel like because of the double in 34, because Luke Shaw is first choice, you can probably just keep hold of him for the next couple of weeks if you've got someone that can come off your bench instead, and then just don't worry about it for 32 and hope that he's back for 33 and 34 onwards, because obviously Man United have got more double game weeks after that as well, and some pretty nice single game weeks. If you're not free hitting in 32 and you don't have good bench cover for him over the next week or two, then you could look to move him on. I think for some people, they might want to look at an Aston Villa defender. They got 3 home fixtures in the next 4, including Newcastle United, Fulham and Nottingham Forest this week as well. I think Moreno is probably the more exciting pick from Aston Villa, but there's always a chance that Lucas Dean will play at some point. So I'd probably go for Tyrone Mings for someone that's absolutely nailed. If you do want to get rid of Shaw and you're free hitting in 32, you could look at a Man City defender, which we're going to talk about later, like Diaz, Stones, or Ake, or someone like that. But in that case, you'd really want to be not having to make another transfer this week. So if you're one of the people that's having to bring Haaland in, then taking Shaw out is for a hit, and I just don't think that's worth it when most people have got a Brighton defender, a Brentford defender, or possibly an extra Newcastle defender, like most of us have got Trippier plus one other one. You could just play them instead for this week and just hope Luke Shaw is back for next week. So unless you're in a position where you've only got one transfer or 2 transfers, I guess, and nothing much to do with them, then you could probably take Shaw out. But I don't think there's a huge amount of defenders out there that people don't already own that are must-have, right? Even with Chelsea defenders, what if Lampard sets up in a back 4? That means one less centre-back, so who's going to play in those 2 spots? What's going to happen to Chilwell and James? Are they then going to play as full-backs? And even with Arsenal, right? Arsenal defenders look good for, West Ham away, Southampton at home. But this week against Liverpool, can Liverpool score in that game at home? Absolutely. So I would not be in a rush to remove Shaw on. Just on the next point really quickly, the good news is Eriksen is back in training and he will be in the squad. So he's probably not going to start against Everton, but it's good that he's back in the squad. I think in particular, that is good for Bruno Fernandes, because I know game week 29 was disappointing. Some people are worried that he's going to play deep against Everton. We're going to talk about that later. But from 31 onwards, Eriksen hopefully fit and Casemiro back from suspension, that is the first choice midfield. Casemiro, Eriksen, Fernandes. That happens. Fernandes much further up the pitch, and then suddenly a much better asset. So I'm not saying you go out and buy Fernandes now, but for anyone that's got him, I think this is pretty good news. So we probably don't need to spend too long on this, but just in case anyone was worried, Arteta confirmed that Saka is completely over his illness and fine to start on Sunday, obviously against Liverpool away. I know some people said to me last week, you said Saka was nailed and he hasn't started against Leeds, and I get that, but it was because of illness. We can go back to saying Saka is absolutely nailed, and if he's fit and available and not ill, he's going to start every single game from now until the end of the season. I guess if Arsenal won the title and there was still a few games to go, there might be some rotation, but worry about that when the time comes. For now, Saka is absolutely fine, and if you've kept him, there is no reason to sell him because Liverpool away, decent fixture for an attacker. Then you got West Ham away and Southampton at home, so very good, especially if you're not free hitting in game week 32. Arteta also said no real changes on team news, won't reveal, but says he has some hope with one player out that he may train tomorrow. So someone that wasn't fit last week, hopefully they'll train tomorrow. I guess possibly them back in the squad. I don't think it's really going to matter from an FPL point of view because most people have like Gabriel, Zinchenko, White, Saka, Martinelli or Odegaard, and they were already fit apart from Saka who was ill, and he's named him specifically. So it might be Nketiah, could be Saliba, but it sounds like he was going to be out a little bit longer. I guess we'll find out at the weekend. It doesn't really matter for FPL, but Saka, absolutely fine. All right, this is a good question. Why are most content creators sticking with Bruno Fernandes and benching Brighton players this week? And that is absolutely me, by the way. I've got Bruno Fernandes in my first 11 and Solly March is sitting first bench as it stands. Bruno will continue in a deep line double pivot role until next week. Surely another blank incoming. And that could absolutely happen again because against Brentford, I didn't get to watch the game because it wasn't on TV, but I've seen the highlights, I've seen the position maps and stuff like that. His average position was behind Sabitzer and Fred. It was slightly ahead of McTominay, but from what people have been saying, even at times he was behind McTominay as well. So he is playing in more of that kind of number 6 role. And the reason that Ten Hag likes him there is for the ball progression, because the general midfield with Casemiro and Eriksen out is Fernandes +2 of Fred, McTominay and Sabitzer, and none of those three players are that great at carrying the ball forward or passing it forward. So that is why Bruno Fernandes is playing a bit deeper. Obviously from next week, Casemiro will be back. We know that Eriksen's going to be in the squad against Everton, so hopefully he'll be available to start sooner rather than later, which means Bruno Fernandes won't be tasked with doing that. So in terms of whether you sell him, I would probably keep hold of him, but you could make a case to bench him this week. I don't know. I guess the reason that I'm not benching him is because it's not a 100% certainty that he plays that role, because he hasn't done it in every single game that Casemiro has been missing for. So he doesn't necessarily play that against Everton. I can't quite decide whether he will or not, because I feel like a big key part of Everton's team is the midfield. So maybe he'll play that role. The other thing is penalties, right? Even if he plays really badly, he plays really deep, hardly creates any chances, doesn't have any shots, all it needs is one dodgy penalty to be given. He converts it, gets 3 bonus points, and suddenly he's on kind of 8 to 10 points, right? Without really having to do much. And I just feel like in FPL, sometimes you've got to make the decision that you'll feel less bad about. So if Solly March scores a goal and he's on my bench, will that feel worse than if I've benched Fernandes and he converts a penalty and March blanks in my team? I just feel like I'd be able to take it a little bit better if March was on the bench. That might be different for you, right? If you think Bruno Fernandes is just going to play deep, not going to get a penalty, March is going to do well, you should play Solly March, because they're playing against Spurs and there is every chance that they can go and beat them, even though it's an away game. But for me, I feel like I've just got to keep Bruno Fernandes in the team. I don't like changing my plans in terms of transfers, who I'm going to play, who I'm going to bench, who I'm going to captain, unless something massive has changed. And this is, in some ways, a big enough change to potentially change my plans, but I'm not 100% sure it definitely happens again. It probably is more likely to happen that he plays deeper than not, but it's not 100% certain. So that is why I'm probably going to play Bruno Fernandes. What I will say is, when this question came in, it did make me think. Sometimes a question comes in and I just think, nope, not going to do that. This is definitely what I want to do. But I did consider for a minute, could I just play Solly March instead of Bruno Fernandes? But if he scores a penalty or something like that, I'll just hate it. So I've got to play him. But if you don't want to do that, if you think he's going to play deep, go ahead and bench him. So a few people asked me about Salah because obviously he was benched against Chelsea, which we weren't really expecting. And that was after coming off in the 69th minute against Man City as well. But from everything I could see from the press conference today, Jurgen Klopp wasn't specifically asked about Mo Salah, so there hasn't really been any major updates. I took this from an article written on Fantasy Football Scout, which says Salah was among the players not cited in training on Thursday, but there was no mention of any issue from Jurgen Klopp. So I guess that's a good thing. Like, if he was injured, you feel like maybe he would have mentioned it. Not necessarily if he wasn't asked, but hopefully that's a good thing. With the usually reliable, I don't know if it's Spion or Spy-on Cop. I think it's Spy-on Cop, right? That kind of makes more sense. If I've got that wrong, let me know down in the comments below. Reporting that it was a mere recovery day. So there were scheduled recovery days for a few players, and that is why Salah wasn't training on Thursday. Klopp discussed his decision to make 6 changes in midweek, one of which involved the benching for Salah. We had a game against City which was an influence physically and performance-wise. Obviously, they didn't play well in that game. They got smashed 4-1. Then we have a game 3 days later, so it's both, right? So he's basically saying the reason for the change against Chelsea, partly performance, partly fitness as well. I just refuse to believe that Salah is now a rotation risk. Everything we've seen for like 5 seasons makes us know that Salah is basically going to start every single game and usually play 80 to 90 minutes. Obviously, there is Ramadan at the moment and fasting and stuff like that, but we've been in this position before with him and he continues to play matches. So I wouldn't be massively put off by the fact he came off on the 69th minute and there was then benched against Chelsea. It has happened in previous seasons. The odd benching just doesn't happen very often. So I'd be very surprised if he misses Arsenal at home, and I suspect he'll go on to play Leeds away, Nottingham Forest at home, and West Ham away as well. So would I be buying Salah this week? Not necessarily, unless you absolutely had to for some reason, which most people are not going to have to. But if I've got him, unless there's a major move you can make, like getting Haaland back, and that is the easiest way to do it. And even in that case, I'm not sure I would probably just keep hold of him. So for those of us that use Bench Boost in Game Week 29, things were quite straightforward because essentially all 15 of our players started. Not quite the case this week. So which Brighton midfielders should we start and who should we bench? And I feel like a lot of people are making this decision for Game Week 30. So here's what I would say about Brighton midfielders, right? We know how important they are for the rest of the season. Between game weeks 33 and 38 specifically, there's 3 double game weeks and some good single game week fixtures as well. So unless they get injured, they're not going anywhere. So what I would do this week is when you've decided who you're going to start, designate that Brighton midfielder as your number 1 pick, and unless something dramatically changes in terms of their positioning or their minutes or something like that, they're always going to be your number 1 pick. So when I wildcarded in Game Week 26 and I chose Mitoma and March, I said that Mitoma was my number 1 Brighton midfielder. Therefore, in Game Week 30 when they're playing Spurs away and I'm probably going to have to bench one, I'm just going to bench March because that decision was already made, right? Next week against Chelsea away, I'm going to bench March because that decision was already made. And I know it sounds weird because I make videos and, give advice, opinions and stuff like that. But where I can, I like to take as many decisions out of my hands as possible, so it limits what I have to think about. Because there's always something else to think about. Should I get Haaland back? Should I captain him? I don't want to also worry about who I think is the better Brighton midfielder. And generally, week to week, not enough changes where the other one you own, or in some cases maybe you own all 3, becomes a better option. Obviously, if something happens like Lallana comes back and he starts playing number 10 and McAllister drops deeper, then that is something that could dramatically change your opinion. But if Mitoma keeps starting on the left and McAllister is a 10 with penalties and March on the right, how good of an FPL option they are doesn't really change too much week to week. And I'm going to talk about who I think is the best in a minute, but that is what I would do. So if you have McAllister and March and you play McAllister this week and you go to next week and they're both still fit, we should probably just play McAllister again. Now, for what it's worth, the order I think is what's on screen. Mitoma number 1, then McAllister while he's playing as a number 10, and then March in last place. It doesn't mean that March is a bad option. He's someone that can get goals and assists. He's creating chances. He's having shots, etc. He's great value. I'm happy to have him in my team. But I feel like I made that decision at the start that Mitoma was the best. If I play him and March does better, so be it. I will still play Mitoma ahead of March in Game Week 31 and any other single game weeks where I need to as well. Obviously, when they double, I'm going to play both anyway. This is just for those single game weeks. So that is what I would do. Choose whoever you think is the best this week. That's my preference. Yours might be different. And just stick with it, because week to week, not enough changes where you should be having to think about this too much. All right, so who is the best Man City defender, not including Ederson? So this is for anyone that wants to bring them in this week for Southampton away. Obviously, Leicester at home in 31. They do blank in game week 32, but I think at this point, most people realise that. They've got a double in 34. They'll probably double again in game week 37 as well. So they do look quite good. But the problem with Man City players in general, and it's not just defenders, is trying to find one that's nailed on to start pretty much every single game. And I'll just say straight away, doesn't matter which one you buy, there is a chance at some point that they could get benched. So just keep that in mind. Now, before I decided on my answer to this, I spoke to Luke, who does an FPL podcast called Inspected Goals. You can go and check that out on YouTube, because he's always looking at Man City lineups and predicting them and stuff like that. And he kind of agreed that Ruben Dias right now is probably the one to buy if you've got the money, because he's 5.9 million. And he's also started the last 6 matches. Now, obviously, Champions League is starting back up again. They've got the first leg against Bayern Munich this midweek. So there could be some rotation. But he seems the safest right now for 5.9 million, started the last 6 games. I did have John Stones as my second pick, because when he's fit, he always seems to start. I think Luke agreed with that, but fitness is always a concern with John Stones. This is what Luke said. In which case, they may rest him this week so that he's fit for Bayern Munich, and then possibly play against Leicester and Bayern Munich again, but they may just manage him over the next few weeks. So I think given that he's only 0.5 million less, I'd probably just go with Dias if you've got the money and just ignore Stones for now. I know it's a little bit annoying because he does have a bit of goal threat, and we've seen him in double game weeks before do extremely well, but it might just not be worth the risk right now. If you don't have 5.9 million, and you want to go a bit cheaper, it's probably Ake, who started the last 6 games. Obviously, on paper, he's left back, but in-game, when they're in possession, it's basically a back 3, and he's playing left centre-back, right? So he started the last 4, so you'd hope that would continue, if I can get my words out. But obviously, Laporte is a factor as well, and at some point, he might play one of the games. When that will be, we don't know. But could I sit here and say that Ake is going to start the next 6 games in the league? Probably not. Laporte might start one of them. And it might be that Ake starts enough for 5 million in that Man City defence to prove value. But if you're the type of FPL manager that's going to panic the second that happens, I just wouldn't bother. Because this happened weeks ago. You remember we were all looking at like Akanji and Ake and players like that. They started getting benched. Some people use transfers to switch them around. Then the new player came in and they got benched as well. So I'm kind of looking at it is it worth the hassle? And potentially it is, because there's not a massive amount of defenders right now that we absolutely have to have in our teams. A lot of people have got Trippier. Some of us have got Luke Shaw. He's injured. Some of us have got kind of like Chelsea defender. But are they good long-term? Possibly, possibly not. So I get why people are looking at Man City defenders. Just be prepared for some rotation. But if you can get someone like Ruben Dias at 5.9 million and he starts the majority of the games for the rest of the season, there are plenty of clean sheet points there, and also some attacking potential as well. The safest bet is, of course, Ederson, but he wasn't included in this question. All right, let's talk about Isak, who was, of course, benched against West Ham in game week 29. Although, to be fair for owners, he did come off the bench and score, so it wasn't the end of the world. But obviously, now going forward, we're worried whether that will happen again. So this is taken from an article on Fantasy Football Scout, and it was Eddie Howe talking about Wilson and Isak. Now, I'm not going to go through it word for word, but essentially he said, I've got 2 outstanding players, and I'll try and make the right call for the next game. The players have to understand when they're playing and they're not playing. Both players have to be honest. Alex was excellent about my decision not to start him at West Ham, and proved that when he came on and scored. The roles were reversed. I tried to say that just a minute ago on a different take and I couldn't get it out, so I'm glad I did there. Roles were reversed. When Callum didn't start against Man United, Alex played really well. Callum comes on and scores. It's that competition that will hopefully drive both players on to give more. And actually, after the game, Callum Wilson did an interview and he kind of said that he had to make his mark because he had been on the bench the previous few games. And then at the end he said, Callum and Alex can play together as well, so it's not just a case of one or the other. I do see a time and a place when they'll be on the pitch at the same time. Now, I feel like lots of us were expecting that to happen, that Isak had built up the fitness, and even if Callum Wilson played, so would Isak. But from that last kind of couple of sentences from Eddie Howe, he's basically saying it will happen, but he's not making it out like it's going to happen every single game. So potentially Isak is a slight issue moving forward. If I was an owner, unless that is my best move to get Haaland, to do Isak to Haaland, I would probably just hold on to him for Brentford away and see what happens. Does he start and Callum Wilson gets benched, in which case there might be a pattern starting to build? Do they both play together? I feel like you can give him another game against Brentford away because he is that good that when he does play, he's going to get your returns. Now, I did a podcast yesterday with James from Planet FPL. His theory is it was just because of the quick turnaround in games and that going forward Isak will start the majority of matches, and I can get behind that thought process. The only thing that slightly worries me is one of the appeals for Isak is that Newcastle have another double game week to come, which hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but will probably be in game week 36, and that will be a quick turnaround of games. So are we going to get to game week 36 with Isak as a double game week option, and he's only going to start one of them? So he is now, he has to be a slight doubt going forward every single game. You're not going to be able to rely on him, but I think at, 6.7 million, you can kind of give him the benefit of the doubt for the next maybe 1 or 2 game weeks and then decide what to do. It's all going to depend on what your team is made up of. If you haven't got Watkins, for example, with 3 home games in the next 4, and you feel like he's a dead cert to start, he's on penalties as well, maybe that is a switch you can make. But for most people, they're not going to be in a position where Isak out this week is something they have to do. I think we can assume he's a doubt going forward, but give him Brentford away and then see what happens after that. So I'm just going to end by quickly talking about my team. Not much has changed since the team selection video yesterday. I was always probably going to do Tony to Haaland because I've got that 5.3 million in the bank. And I just think Pep Guardiola being quite positive about Haaland today makes it even easier to do. So that will be my move. It's not that Tony is a must sell or anything like that. He's perfectly available to play against Newcastle, but he is just 1 yellow card away from being suspended for 2 games. So if I'm selling him, Watkins or Kane, Tony is the biggest liability in my team, so that is who's going to move on for Haaland. And look, I'm not 100% confident Haaland starts, but I think it's more likely than not, and I'm just too afraid to go without him. And it was always the plan to get him back this week anyway. I've got the money, so that's what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'll make the move tonight. I think it's unlikely we get any news about Haaland tomorrow because the game's at 5:30 UK time. The deadline's 11 AM. But there's no real benefit to moving tonight. Haaland might go up in price, but it looks unlikely. And in terms of Tony, he might drop. But if you look on the list view, I bought him at 7.6. So I got 7.7 to spend when I sell him as soon as he went up to 7.8. And if he drops tonight, he's at 7.9, so he'll come down to 7.8, in which case I'll still have 7.7 to spend. So there's no rush to make that move, but that's probably what I'll do. So if you can just imagine this team with Haaland instead, captain's on Rashford. I don't know if that's going to stick. I feel like once I see Haaland in my team, once I make that move, I'm just going to be too afraid to not captain him. And if I think he starts, if I genuinely think that, I probably should captain him as well. So I'll see how I feel tomorrow. But right now it's on Rashford. It's just between those two. I'm probably not going to go for Watkins or Harry Kane or anything like that. The million, when I do Tony to Haaland, just to come back to this screen, will be used on a goalkeeper transfer. The original plan was to do Raya to Ederson. Obviously, we're going to get to see this weekend Frank Lampard's first Chelsea lineup in his second spell in charge. There's a chance that Mendy would play. If that happens, I'll just sell Kepa instead. We'll also see whether he sticks to a back 5 or moves to a back 4, and I'll have further thoughts on Chilwell next week too. The only other thing that's changed is obviously we've got the news that Luke Shaw is out for Everton. So unless Ten Hag was lying and we randomly see him in the 11 against Everton, he's not going to play. So I'm going to play Botman instead. It is quite close between him and Estupiñán. Estupiñán is definitely the more attacking defender. But I think when you look at the clean sheet odds, and to be honest, the fixture on paper, Brentford away is probably easier than Spurs away. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think Newcastle or Brighton are going to keep a clean sheet, but I think the slightly higher chance is Newcastle, which is why I'm playing Botman ahead of Estupiñán. It might be that I get to the deadline and I want to split my risk. So instead of having double Newcastle defence, I might play Estupiñán instead because I've only got one Brighton defender. But I'm also slightly thinking about the fact I've got Harry Kane and I want him to score, and if he does, he's going to wipe the Estupiñán clean sheet, whereas I'm going to sell Tony and I won't have many Brentford attackers. Now, I'm not saying that's a logical way of thinking about it, but if it does work out, that's going to feel pretty good to have got that right. But ultimately, I think Newcastle just much more like... sorry, not much more. Slightly more likely to keep a clean sheet. So that's the team. Nothing major to panic about. Mitoma is my number one Brighton midfielder, as I said. So March is on the bench. I think I'm happy to play Odegaard ahead of him. Haaland in for Tony. Rashford or Haaland captain. Let's see what happens tomorrow. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll catch you tomorrow for a proper deadline stream. No more sheds.